My dear husband. Chapter 2. The day our paths connected. I sometimes wonder, was that the day our paths truly connected? Or was that the day David misunderstood just how far away I was from him? Maybe that was the day he decided that if he wanted to stand beside me, he would first have to touch the sky. I still don't know. Even after all these years, I have never been completely certain about what was going through his mind that day. Maybe he saw me as someone impossibly far above him. Maybe my name, my family, my score. Everything he witnessed that day made him believe that standing beside me would require him to climb much higher than an ordinary person ever could. Or perhaps, he simply decided that if the world had placed a distance between us, then he would spend his life crossing it. I don't know. David never told me. And knowing my dear husband, he probably never will. But that was the day our story took its second step. And strangely enough, neither of us realized it. The examination began with a long introduction. Very long. Painfully long. Our host seemed determined to explain every single detail before allowing anyone to touch the mystical crystal. He spoke about the history of the examination, the importance of weapon affinity, the ranking system, the academies, the responsibilities of Royal Academy students, the expectations placed upon those who received high scores. And then he repeated several of those things again. I listened. At least I tried to, but my attention kept drifting. Again and again. I found myself looking toward David. I don't know why. Even now, I can't properly explain it. There was something about that boy that kept drawing my attention. Maybe it was his ridiculous amount of luggage. Honestly, that was probably the first thing I noticed about him. He still had all of it beside him. Every bag, every case, every strange little piece of luggage he had brought into the examination hall. It was almost amusing. But after watching him for a while, I started noticing something else. His eyes. They were different. Not particularly frightening. Not aggressive. Just unbending. While everyone else was looking around, whispering, talking, or trying to impress the people around them, David's eyes remained focused on the host. He was listening. Really listening. He didn't seem distracted even once. It was almost as though he was trying to memorize every word being spoken. I wondered why. Was he trying to understand the academy? Was he preparing himself for what came next? Was he trying to learn every rule because he knew he couldn't afford to make another mistake? Or was he simply the kind of person who took every opportunity seriously? I didn't know. I still didn't know him. Yet I kept watching him. Then finally, the introduction ended. The host smiled and looked across the room. Everyone seated here has already demonstrated exceptional talent. His voice carried proudly through the hall. There is no need to worry. You have all already been selected. A wave of relief and excitement moved through the students. Some smiled. Some whispered. A few looked incredibly proud of themselves. I didn't react much. I already knew I would be attending the Royal Academy. For me, the examination was never about whether I would be accepted. It was about proving something to myself. But then, I noticed David moving. His head slowly turned. He looked around the room. At first, I didn't understand what he was doing. He looked at one student, then another, then another. It almost seemed as though he was counting us. I remember wondering about it. Was he counting how many people he would have to challenge if he wanted to reach the top? Or was he simply studying everyone in the room? Maybe he was looking at us and realizing something. Every student sitting there had something he didn't. Privilege, connections, resources, a family name, a place waiting for them, while he had to earn everything himself. I couldn't know, but before I could think about it any further, the host spoke again. His tone changed. Except for these two young men who are standing there, the room became quieter. My eyes immediately moved toward David. The host gestured toward him and his friend. They have entered this examination through special consideration. I remember feeling uncomfortable. Then he used a word that I disliked even more. Charity. I felt something inside me sink. I immediately turned toward David. I expected him to react. I thought perhaps he would lower his head. Maybe his face would become red. Maybe he would show anger. Anything. But he didn't. Not even a little. David didn't flinch. His shoulders didn't move. His expression didn't change. He simply stood there, quietly, as though the word had passed right over him. But I was looking directly at him, and I noticed his eyes. There was something there. Not weakness, not fear. Something harder. Something that had been built over time. He had probably heard things like this before. Perhaps many times. And maybe that was why he knew how to hide his reaction. I remember thinking something that surprised even me. I don't know much about this boy, but he is rigid. More rigid than the noble children around me. More rigid than many of the adults I had met. Perhaps even more unbendable than I was. Most people changed when they entered a room like this. They adjusted their behavior according to who was watching. David didn't. He stood exactly the same way. And for some reason, I admired him for that. The examination finally began. One student after another approached the crystal. Each candidate placed their hand upon its surface. The crystal responded. Numbers appeared. The atmosphere slowly became more competitive. And I understood why. This wasn't an ordinary academy examination. The students sitting around me were already exceptional. Most of their scores were above 85%. For a normal academy, that was extraordinary. But this was the Royal Academy. Here, 85 was simply the beginning. The examiners took their time. Sometimes far too much time. They praised students. They explained results. They talked about families. They talked about potential. And whenever someone from an important noble family stepped forward, the atmosphere became even more dramatic. I wasn't particularly interested. Until my name was called. Now, the examiner's voice suddenly became much more energetic. I could almost feel his excitement. I would like to request Claera von D. Claus to grace us with her presence. I almost sighed. There it was. My name, my family, my reputation. Everything that came with being a von D. Claus. The examiner continued. We all know who Miss Claera is. Of course they did. I was the first and only daughter of the von D. Claus family. One of the 4 great royal clans of planet Aleph. A family that had existed for generations. A family that carried history on its shoulders. And according to almost everyone, I was the pride of that family. The genius girl. The future queen. The daughter who was expected to accomplish extraordinary things. But then the examiner said something that made me think about my ancestor. He began speaking about the first weapon god. My great-great-great-great-grandfather. The first, and so far, the only weapon god this world had ever known. Perhaps this is a good time to explain a little about our world. Because the Aleph of today is not the Aleph that existed in the distant past. Today, our world is not ruled by a single royal family. There are 4 major royal clans. The von D. Claus family is one of them. There are also many smaller families. Some are weak. Some are incredibly powerful. Some control territories. Some control academies. Some possess ancient bloodlines. And some hold influence that even the major clans cannot casually ignore. But centuries ago, things were different. Back then, the world was ruled under a single authority. And that authority belonged to my ancestor, the first weapon god. He wasn't simply powerful. He stood at a level that nobody else could reach. Weapons obeyed him. Power answered him. And the entire world eventually recognized him as the strongest existence alive. But before he died, he left behind a warning. A warning that became the foundation of our entire system. He said there would be only one person who should truly rule this world. The weapon god. Not a king. Not a noble. Not a royal clan. The weapon god. And he said that if someone else ever took the throne, a great danger would fall upon our world. Those words became a vow. The great families remembered them. So when my ancestor died, nobody took the throne. Instead, the powerful families created a system to govern the world together. For major royal clans, many smaller powerful families, an agreement, a balance, and a throne that remained empty. For generations, nobody dared to sit upon it, because everyone remembered the first weapon god's warning. But there was something else he had said, something that most noble families never liked discussing. He had said that the next weapon god would not come from royalty. He would come from ordinary blood. An ordinary person. Someone born without a great family name. Someone nobody would expect. And then he said something even stranger. Even after becoming the next weapon god, that person would not sit upon the throne. Instead, he would give the throne to someone else. And by doing so, he would open a door. A door to another world. A parallel world. A world far larger than ours. At the time, those words must have sounded impossible. Centuries later, they had become something else. A myth. A taboo. Something noble families preferred not to discuss. Because prophecies can be dangerous. Especially prophecies that suggest greatness can come from ordinary blood. Some families probably hid the story because they feared losing their authority. Others probably hid it because they wanted to maintain discipline. And perhaps some simply wanted to keep people from dreaming too high. Even now, I sometimes wonder if my ancestor knew something that we still don't understand. Because the way he spoke about the future, it didn't sound like a guess. It sounded like certainty. But nobody knows the truth. At least, not yet. Miss Claera. The examiner's voice pulled me back into the present. I stepped forward. The mystical crystal waited before me. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching. I placed my hand upon its surface. And then, the crystal reacted. Immediately, light exploded across its surface. The number began rising. 70, 80, 90. Then, it crossed into 3 digits. The hall became silent. The number stopped. 100%. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Neither could anyone else. The crystal continued glowing. A powerful light filled the examination area. People began whispering. Then the whispers became louder. The noise continued growing until the examiners themselves had to calm everyone down. I had achieved the highest possible result. 100%. Full affinity. Affinity toward every weapon the crystal could measure. Every single one. Even I felt shocked. For a brief moment, I thought, really? Do I really possess affinity toward everything? All those years of being called a genius. For the first time, I understood why. But I quickly reminded myself of something important. Affinity was not mastery. A high affinity didn't mean I could immediately wield every weapon perfectly. It meant I possessed the potential. Nothing more. So I controlled my emotions. I didn't want pride to control me. I stepped away from the crystal. The hall was still buzzing. Then I returned to my seat beside Catherine. And for perhaps the first time in our friendship, Catherine was completely silent. She just stared at me. I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything. Eventually, I almost laughed. Soon, there were only 2 students left, David and his friend. His friend stepped forward first. He placed his hand upon the crystal. The crystal reacted. The number appeared. 60%. There was a brief silence. 60%. For an ordinary academy, that could have been considered a very respectable result. But this was the Royal Academy. Here, 60% was the minimum requirement. Still, he had passed. I felt relieved for him. Then, David stepped forward. The hall seemed different somehow. I don't know why. Maybe because I had been watching him all day. Maybe because I had started wondering what kind of person he really was. He walked toward the crystal. Still quiet. Still carrying that same unbending expression. He placed his hand upon the crystal. The light appeared. The number began rising. And finally, it stopped. 65%. I stared at the number. For some reason, I felt disappointed. And I didn't understand why. I barely knew him. We had barely exchanged words. He was a stranger. Yet somewhere inside me, I had hoped he would score higher. Maybe I wanted the boy who had looked so unbending to prove that he could stand among everyone else. Maybe I wanted him to show those people that their assumptions were wrong. I don't know. But when I saw 65, something inside me sank. Around me, I could see the reactions of the other students. Disdain. Some looked at him as though the score had proven exactly what they expected. 65%. For a normal academy. A good result. For the Royal Academy. Barely enough. I looked at David. He didn't react. Again. That same silence. That same rigid expression. He had passed. That was what mattered. Fortunately, both boys were accepted. But their scores placed them at the lowest rank. And that was when I finally understood something. David and I were standing at completely different ends of the same examination. My score was at the very top. His was near the bottom. I had everything. He had almost nothing. I had been born into one of the most powerful families in the world. He came from an ordinary family. I had been called a genius since childhood. He had just barely crossed the minimum requirement. I already had a future waiting for me. He would have to build his. Perhaps that was why, when I looked at him that day, I felt something I couldn't name. Not love. Definitely not love. We had just met. It was something much smaller. Something much quieter. Maybe curiosity. Maybe sympathy. Maybe admiration. Or perhaps something I wouldn't understand until much later. The examination eventually came to an end. Students began leaving. The room slowly emptied. David and his friend gathered their luggage. That ridiculous mountain of luggage. And then they started walking away. I watched them go. There was nothing special about it. At least, it shouldn't have been special. Two strangers had met by chance. One was a future queen. The other was an ordinary boy. We had spoken only a handful of words. There was no promise, no confession, no reason to meet again. Our paths should have separated right there. And perhaps that was what both of us believed. That we would simply forget each other. That I would continue toward my future. And David would continue toward his. Two completely different roads. Two completely different lives. Two people who had met for a single examination. And would eventually become nothing more than a memory. At least, that was what I believed. Because fate has always had a strange sense of humor. And I know that better than anyone now. Because I am sitting here, years later, thinking about that same quiet boy. The boy who carried too much luggage. The boy who never lowered his head. The boy who stood silently while everyone around him told him he didn't belong. The boy who scored only 65%. And yet somehow decided that standing beside someone like me was worth reaching for. Maybe that was the day he decided to touch the sky. Maybe he looked at me and thought I was too far away to ever reach. Maybe my name made him realize just how enormous the distance between us really was. Or maybe he simply decided that distance didn't matter. I still don't know. David never told me. But perhaps, one day, he will. And when that day comes, I'll finally ask him what was going through his mind when he first heard my name. Because that was the day our paths appeared to separate. Yet somehow, it was also the day fate quietly locked them together. And neither of us knew it. Not yet. So you have heard chapter 2 of My Dear Husband. A simple examination. A 100% genius. And a boy who scored only 65%. Yet somehow, fate had already begun connecting their paths. If you enjoyed this chapter, please subscribe to Echoes of Nova and join us for the next part of David and Clara's journey. Chapter 3 is coming soon. Until then, take care and keep listening.